Hey, Teik. Thank you for joining Couch Confidentials. It's good to see you again. The last time we met was about a month and a half ago at the Martech World Forum. And after we got talking over a beer or two, I was like, I need to get you on the show because you had such a fascinating story to tell about your career, something that I've never been able to look into. And we'll get into that in a second. But before we continue, can you kind of introduce yourself to the listeners and the viewers?
Sure. Thanks for having me, Matt. So I'm Teik Chua. I met Matt in the Martech World Forum a month and a half ago, and we really got along discussing about things, or everything AdTech and Martech. And the reason for that is because I started my career in the advertising space, but really grew into the technology part of it as I progressed. So I come from a two-country background, right? So I was born in the UK, but I was raised in Malaysia, and because of that, I
Yep.
wanted to see my professional career reflect that personal aspect of me as well. So having worked in the UK and started my career here, I wanted to take that over to Asia and see how that was a reflection of me, but also how it reflected basically the same role I did over there. I wanted to see what the differences were, right? The world is so much
Oh,
bigger than
wow.
just the one country that
Yes.
we're in at the moment. So because of that, I actually transferred with a consulting company. So I worked 4 years at Accenture in London before doing 2.5 years in Southeast Asia, etc. So that was the great thing about these big companies as well, is that there are a lot of these schemes actually available to people to transfer. So I took
Oh,
advantage
that's
of
very cool.
that. Yeah, I mean, it's not just those global companies as well. So where I've ended up now at Virgin Media O2 brand side, even though they're very much a UK company, they also have relocation packages, should I say, to help support
Oh,
people
really?
bringing in talent from. Yeah, so even though they don't have offices around the world, we are very much predominantly a UK based entity. They still have packages
Yeah.
to get talent into the company, into the one country. But Accenture being the other side of that, where they have 70 plus offices in across 70 plus countries of the world. I mean, hundreds of offices across 70 countries of the world. That one, yeah, they were very open and very supportive in terms of me moving back, because to challenge myself professionally, but also they understood the family aspect that I wanted. It was a part of my life that I wanted to be close to, yeah, to home.
Yeah. That's pretty cool because I think one of the topics that we got talking around was, of course, CDP. I think we attended a roundtable first around customer data platforms. It was sponsored by Zeotap, and that
Mm.
was that really. I got to listen to you. I got to hear about how logical your thinking is around CDPs and the experience that you brought to the table. So that was phenomenal. So afterwards, we met up for a beer, and you started talking about the experience you had in Southeast Asia, and it's something that I've had been working on. I've been doing some research about customer data platforms or Martech in general in emerging markets, but I think I think I'm misrepresenting that whole research now because Southeast Asia is not necessarily an emerging market. It's quite advanced, but they use different tools. The culture is different, and it's is it isolated in a sense? I mean, what were I know that we've already discussed some of this, but what were your experiences compared to working here now in the UK?
Yeah, so there was a range of differences across different aspects of work, shall I say. So, for example, specifically regarding CDPs and technology, there were different type of dominance of platforms over there, but also in terms of the way of ways of working as well, like the people and process side. Uh, there's there's
Yeah,
uh there's differences there. So if I start, for example, just within the core CDP space, what I noticed is there are a lot more challenger brands within the European market compared to Southeast Asia. So I find, as a whole, we take a step back from CDPs as well. If
yeah,
you think about it fitting more into like the digital marketing space, I would say Southeast Asia is slightly behind Europe in that regard. So there's still a lot of CDP implementation projects. There's still a lot of people moving from DMPs to CDPs in Southeast Asia even this year. The difference in Europe is that we did this several years ago, right? So there is a slight lag behind.
Driven a lot by regulation, I think you mentioned as well.
Correct. Yes. So European, we were forced to make the move, whereas in Asia there's a bit more leeway to play in that space. Saying all that, they are advanced. They are more advanced in certain areas, like I would say commerce. So a lot more.
Yep.
I would say phone usage, a lot more online shopping. That kind of infrastructure is a lot more further over there. So whether that's expanding into social commerce or any of these new forms of sales, our consulting work there, I feel, is a lot more progressive, a lot more further ahead than Europe. So there's pros and cons of both sides. And then we dive into CDPs itself, because I would say they're catching up with, like, for example, Europe and potentially America. A lot of those companies that are making the first moves there are the ones that are choosing those established players. So the ones who are already going into that space already have the wider tech ecosystem. So whether that's Salesforce or Adobe in particular, it's a lot easier sell to add that on. To take a big risk and to go out with a challenger brand, I haven't seen that too much in that region yet.
That's interesting because we have seen CDPs like Miro pop up. I think they've been especially active around Singapore, but it's still. So what you're kind of describing is what I've also seen in research that I've done around the Middle East, where the Gartners, the Forresters, they kind of lead in influencing the big businesses in what they should implement as a CDP is concerned. I don't want to talk about it to what capacity Accenture plays a role in that as a huge consultancy. But when you look at companies who do not depend on large consultancy agencies, is it kind of the same trend there? Are they also leaning more towards the Salesforces, Adobes, etc.?
So that one you do see some of the more niche or challenger brands coming in. So I was very much speaking from very much a large enterprise brand kind of consulting style with my experience. But what I would say in that space, yes, we've also been pitched and spoken to a few players. For example, there's one regional one there called Insider, which is also in a lot of RFPs, working with trying to get their foot in. But I feel from these large consultancies, we speak about in general, not just Accenture, but I've spoken to my colleagues around in Deloitte, etc., Capgemini. These kind of big consultancies, we have very large partnerships in place, which also assist both sides in terms of working together to establish this CDP, especially for large enterprise companies, which require a specific, like, in-depth skill in these large products or large suites. That's the reason why I think we go to market with a lot of these partners in this space, and the client sees the benefit as well from.
Yeah, and is it also a kind of a case of maturity? I mean, as you said, that Southeast Asia is kind of leading in certain aspects around marketing technology, especially around commerce. And then Europe is leading on something else. But some of the trends that I've been seeing, especially here in Europe, and not necessarily the North American market, but especially here in Europe, is that a lot of companies are leaning towards more all-in solutions. I mean, the debate's probably as old as myself right now about composable or not, but what I've been seeing now is still this tendency to work with customer engagement platforms. How is that perceived in Southeast Asia? I mean, I think when you described it at Martech World Forum, is that you operated from within Malaysia, but then you were sent out to these kind of local offices to talk to the local teams and enabling them. Is it kind of the further you get outside of Malaysia, out of that enterprise field, all these trends seem to change?
There are definitely local market nuances for sure. The whole way we are set up, the whole way the region is set up, it is very much more interdependent than I would say Europe is. So Europe has a lot of core talent, strong talent within each of its core countries and core markets
Yeah.
that they tend to be self-sufficient. In Southeast Asia, it's very much because of the cost differences as well of employing people in different regions. There's very much we don't call them offshore, we call them near shore because they are very much our near colleagues. But there's an element of certain
Yeah.
type of work will be done from, like, for example, the Singapore hub, but then a lot of the potentially execution or delivery would be done on the ground in the actual local market. And where needed, the leadership, there would be leadership across all countries. Don't get me wrong there, but a lot of the strategic thinking as well. You'll just find out if you look at our headcount, for example, in Singapore, it's very top heavy. It's like an inverted pyramid. Whereas if you look at the other countries, it's very much more natural, and what you'd find in most in like Europe as well, just your natural pyramid where
Yeah.
there's one or two senior leaders and a bigger base. But because of that inverted pyramid in Singapore, and the reason to get that profitable and get that and be able to sustain that, a lot of these resources, these more senior ones, fly out to these local regions and provide their expertise as well. And through that, they also get a view across multiple countries. So the booming ones, I think, for all consultancies in Southeast Asia at the moment, they're looking at, for example, Indonesia and Thailand. When I actually inquired to go to Southeast Asia, they actually asked me, would I
Yeah.
be open to Thailand or Indonesia first? So it's very much they're trying to put people there at the moment. And then we have the other key ones for us as well was Malaysia and Singapore. But the boom market, the ones that are really bringing in the money at the moment are Indonesia and Thailand. But because of our expertise working across all four, and some other ones, some satellite ones where we have different kind of operations, like I would say like Philippines,
Yeah.
etc. Those core four ones allow us to share and learn from each other and see what works in the region.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. I mean, I'm just trying to imagine in Thailand and in Indonesia. Are you? I mean, I don't. I'm not expecting you to know, but are there any kind of like local players there that just have set up their? And they've listened to the market there. They've seen that there's this need for something like a customer data platform or engagement platform, and they start working on a local solution. I can imagine that there is, but it's just. Um, what I've been seeing is like this rising maturity level among SMBs and more mature people coming in. I think even AI is a good example of that. Somebody yesterday told me a company from England, they just recruited someone straight out of university who has been, who's grown up digitally, who is so native with working with everything around marketing technology and even AI at the point straight out of school that they've become so productive. So I can imagine, like, if you go to Indonesia, which I know has incredible. I think it was you told me that their population was 40 million.
No, way more than that.
It was
It's the third most populous country in the world after China and India.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so I
In the
completely got
hundreds
that
of
wrong.
millions. Yeah.
Sorry, Indonesia. I think it's just on one island alone, then probably. But it's so I can imagine that they've got local players as well. But regardless of the technology, you also told me some interesting stories and kind of anecdotes around the culture there. I mean, here, I remember when I got out of the military and I got my first job. I was interacting with my boss, and I kept on calling him sir. And after like three times, he said, no, we don't do that here. It's just, call me by my first name. I just can't imagine how that goes. I've done work in the Middle East where I know that hierarchy plays an important role, but not necessarily from the business aspect, but also out of respect. How was that? I mean, you came from the UK.
Yeah.
You moved there. How different was that for you in terms of dealing with customers and dealing with colleagues?
So I'll start on the colleague side, so internally before we reach out.
Yeah.
The great thing about the way that it was structured over there is, especially because I was based in Singapore and like I said it was a inverted pyramid, a lot of leadership,
Yeah.
and just the very scale of it is a lot smaller than, for example, we're talking versus the UK. And because the scale's a lot smaller, and the team's a lot smaller, you do have a lot more interactions across the vertical spectrum. So you do get a lot more leadership time. You do work with a lot more junior people in a day-to-day basis. Whereas in the
Yeah.
UK, because just the scale, there's just so many people, you tend to operate one up, one down, right? And then they would then interact one up, one down. Um, Whereas in Southeast Asia, because the teams were so lean and agile, you would have
Yeah.
the full spectrum within a pod. So that was nice, and that was also that you learn a lot from people who've
Did you
done.
experience a bit of culture shock in that sense as well, or?
So the culture shock was less because they're a lot more senior. The culture shock was more than on the other side in terms of how just the nuances of how people work there versus in the UK. So one example I like to use is rather than an example, I'll just say they're a lot more direct. So when something doesn't go wrong, when something goes
Yeah.
wrong, which it always does in both regions of the world, in the UK, it's very much going around the subject. It's more like so how did this happen? What can we do to make sure this doesn't happen again? Very indirect. Whereas in Singapore, it was very much
Yeah.
so who did this? Why did you make a mistake here? It's very much there's pros and cons of that. Obviously, from the social aspect, there's a bit you have to be a bit more thicker skin. But in terms of actually then
Yeah.
resolving problems, some would argue, and I've seen it as well, that it sometimes cuts to the chase a lot easier. You learn from the
Yeah.
mistake. You don't feel like you can hide, or when you've done something wrong, it's yeah you confront it head on, and then you move on, right? So there's pros and cons of that aspect of the internal workplace as well. I would say then from the external side, um,
Yeah.
working with brands, that again I found over there because potentially because of I wouldn't say the scale of the companies, but maybe because internally we're working with a lot more senior leaders. Uh, we also at my level, say for example, manager level, I got to interact with a lot more senior clients on the brand side. Because when we went for pitch,
Okay.
for example, we would have the senior leaders in our room that uh, would welcome us in as part of the conversation or part of that specific discussion. And so the reflection on the brand side as well, their equivalent, their peers would appear there. So that kind of that verticality, I can see what you're saying. Like for example, from the Middle East, there's a lot of hierarchy. There is within Asia as well. There's a lot of hierarchy, but I would say in the professional workplace like this, because of our size, even though we are one of the biggest companies in the world, because of the specific regions set up, that those boundaries, those floors, the ceilings were a lot more transparent. So because of that, on the brand side as well, I also got to interact with a lot more senior clients than I think I would have in the UK. In the UK as well, I would be told to like
Okay.
man mark a few levels down, for example, than for example C-suite.
Interesting. I mean, the biggest burning question I have now. I mean, I find it super interesting that you went to Malaysia for 2.5 years and you came back.
Singapore, just
Yeah, I just. Oh, sorry, Singapore. Yeah. God, I'm just stepping a lot of toes here from people from Southeast Asia to Singapore. So you went there kind of with a British mindset, and from what I understood from what you talking about, you adapted really quickly. But after 2.5 years of living in Singapore and interacting with companies and leadership in that area, how was your experience coming back to the UK? Did you that directness, for example? I know being Dutch, we are always very direct, and it's quite often one of the things, the kind of the comments we hear the most from tourists is like, "Wow, you don't beat around the bush. You come in sliding with an extended leg." At sometimes it's a Dutch expression, but did you bring anything back from Singapore to the UK? Any kind of positive experience, or did you try being more direct in some cases when you thought it could be more beneficial?
Yeah, for sure. I think I picked up I picked up a lot of resilience and being like, for example, thick-skinned, and realizing a lot of it, basically all of it, is it's not personal, right? It's business and
Exactly.
it's
Yeah. Oh,
different
yeah.
way of thinking. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest lessons I've ever learned is that if you do get critiqued, it's often
Yes.
about you and your position, your role, and not you as a person. But sorry, I interrupted.
No, no. And it's a fascinating point because so all of that directness, I think there's a balance of it to play off, which I brought back. So I would say that when working with like a lot of my colleagues in Singapore, we'd get to the solution a lot quicker, break down the problem because especially if it's a
Yeah,
people problem, you address it just head on, or whatever problem, you just address it head on. The difference then, I would say, between that approach, that was on the I felt on the short term, it may have been more efficient, but on the longer term, the reason I'm also part of the reason I came back to the UK was because I created a lot more long-standing relationships with my ex-colleagues,
yeah,
both on the internal but on the brand side. So the reason for that is because I think by not addressing it head on and building that kind of, I don't know how to articulate this well, but what I'm trying to say is by not being so direct as well, you're breeding an
hmm,
element of personal into it rather than just business. So as we said before,
true.
we said it's just business, not personal. But the thing is, I feel
Yeah,
in the UK, a lot of it, especially after you work with people, it's true in Asia as well, but because I was in the UK a lot longer, after a certain amount of time, the personal does bleed into the business side. And because of that, by not being that direct, you build that personal relationship a lot easier. And from
yeah,
that, there's also other opportunities. So I feel like, for example, even though I was in the room with a lot more senior people in the on the Asia side, it was purely business. We wouldn't go for a drink after, go for dinner after. Whereas in the UK, it's very much a thing of getting to know you as well,
yeah.
not just on the business side.
Is it maybe the word empathy that you're looking for? That there's a lot more empathy in. I mean, I agree. There's definitely value in being and dealing direct. If a situation benefits from a direct action, direct interaction, I should say, it should definitely be applied. But I agree to a certain extent that having empathy for your colleagues, and with that, I'm trying to mean who are these people? What's their home situation like? What is their what are their interests around the professional level, so that when something does happen, you're in a better position to actually put yourself in their shoes and maybe understand why they did certain things. It's clearly from the way that I'm describing, and I did not study psychology, but I think we're on the same level. I remember that when I went to the military when I was 17, and I'd always kind of grown up in most of it in Western Europe. There were 2 years that I spent outside of it. And I remember going to the United States where I joined the US Navy. And I found that, I was very open, very kind of liberal thinking, wanting to make friends with everyone. But I quickly noticed that that is just not the way it works there. And I have to say that's why I asked the question in the beginning around culture shock, because you start to doubt yourself as like, wow, am I that much of an alien in this kind of in this system? But yeah, I think on a professional level, I do prefer. I can appreciate the directness, but like you said, it's always good to know who you're working with. And talking about that, I mean, you did consultancy, but now you're working brand side again. And I think I've done it the other way around. So I'm super curious to hear. I mean, what were the motivations of doing that? It's you bring a lot of experience to the table. I think that is definitely in your favor. But it's you get to stick with one brand now.
Yeah, I think so. I spent you see the first decade of my professional career consultancy or agency side, and what was great about that was that I got great visibility across numerous clients back to back, right? So it was an accelerated learning curve
Yeah,
of seeing how different people from different companies from different industries operate.
absolutely.
But after a certain amount of time, I felt like um, I wanted to build something for the longer term. So not to say that our engagements are for the short term, but there is
No, no.
consultancy is you do change team, change company, change projects on a regular basis. Whereas on the brand side, I wanted to take ownership of an area, take ownership of the team, and really see that through in the long run and how
Yeah.
that grows. So I think it naturally evolves with my like age as well. That I'm in this part of my life now where I want to settle down, put down some roots, rather than changing country all the time, moving.
Yeah, yeah.
place. So again, it's that personal position in life is very much where I am at business wise as well, business minded. So
Yeah, one is reflecting the other.
yes. So because of that was the
And
main reason moving brand. Yeah.
okay, and I mean, so let's paint us a picture. You spent quite a few years in consultancy, switching companies, switching projects, switching stakeholders that you were dealing with. How does it feel now? Is there a kind of a different sense of ease or of rest that you now have the kind of the time to a certain extent to really put your energy into something and being able to see it grow? I think that's one of the main reasons I could understand a moving brand side is really going in more in depth in what you're doing.
Yeah, I feel like now it's you see in consulting everything would be bounded to the statement of work or the contract, and a lot
Yeah,
of the time there's payment milestones scattered within, right? So by a certain date you have to hit a certain position to get paid. So the difference being on the brand side is there are OKRs, there are certain sticks in the road signposts as well.
yeah. The responsibilities are still there.
Yes, but at the same time, if we get there and we're not quite ready, there's a willingness from the business as well. I'm not. This is a very blanket statement, but for from the cases I've seen, it's to push that out to make sure we get the right solution before we move to the next stage. Whereas in consulting,
Yeah,
it's you just suffer. You start hurting monetarily, fiscally. That if you miss that at milestone, so there is not. We get it right. Maybe it took us like 4 weeks to do the design, for example. If within the last week, the last few days, we are not quite there, it's then everybody working 24/7 to ensure we still get there within those last few days, right? Whereas
yeah.
brand side, you might just kick it back 1 week and so you ensure you get the right answer. Both sides will, but just in consulting, there is a lot
Yeah.
more time pressure to get it out of that date.
Yeah, there's been a lot of critique on that way of working. I think it's called the 9-6-6 method or something. 9 to 6 for 6 days,
Mm.
6 days a week. Is that kind of well? By the sounds of it, that's what you're describing. You know, if you're not hitting your deadline, it's it's all hands on deck, 24/7 to make sure that you reach that milestone within the project. I mean, is that kind of a breath of fresh air right now that and I want to make clear that there's still responsibilities, there's still what's the word I'm looking for, accountability, working
Yes.
brand side, but it's just different. Like I said, it comes more from the empathy side of things, that you are more interdependent, working together. Yeah, but how have you experienced that so far? And I mean, how would you, is it been more pleasurable working brand side right now?
It's not
Well,
necessarily.
let me put it another way. I can imagine if you work for a consultancy, things move fast, and that can definitely be a real dopamine kick. Do you feel like with working brand size, things can tend to go too slow?
They can do, But again, speaking from because I'm new to brand side, and I can see so
Yeah,
many colleagues on their projects that they started years ago, moving at pace as well. Just maybe because I've just started. I'm very much in trying to figure out my base, my vision, and where I want to bring my team. So
yeah,
within that regard, yes, a lot of it is at the moment getting the approvals, etc., getting the buy-ins from different teams to that common vision that I'm trying to build. Um, and because of that, there's a lot of working through the pain points, the problems, very much like what you would do consultancy side, pre-contract, pre-project, right? So, sorry,
yeah,
not contract, in the contracting phase. So I feel like I'm very much there now. And once we get that sign off and that alignment of all the teams and business units, I feel then that the pace will kick off, because then with the alignment, there's also a promise, right? Teams are all then expecting something. And I believe
yeah.
then they were very much, so maybe it's just where I am in my career brand side that I've just started, that we are in that kind of phase. But I'm sure once we promise that OKR, yeah, the accountability and moving that milestone out will be looked less favorably on.
Yeah. And what kind of knowledge or experiences are you bringing to Virgin Media O2? I mean, we spoke at the beginning that you've worked or got experience in ad tech and Martech, and CDPs are definitely a part of your kind of your daily playbook.
Hmm.
What is it that really gets you up in the morning, looking at what you're doing now? Is it? I love, for instance, to follow all the developments around customer data in general. This whole AI thing, is that the kind of the knowledge that you're bringing into Virgin Media O2 right now?
Yeah. So this one side I got to work very closely with in Singapore was the data side, and
Yeah,
specifically around marketing data. So there are a lot of concepts, a lot of like packaged products that they went to market with that did very well over there. That's one thing I'm trying to bring in-house here as well. Is one universal problem we tend to see, including what we see at Virgin Media too, is building data for use cases and for
yeah,
campaigns. So the problem with that approach, I call that bottoms up, top down, driven by giant use case in business, is that almost every time we'd have to go back to the data team and go to a backlog of sprints to get that data attribute to go live. The reverse thinking, or the thinking that can go hand in hand with that, because there'll always be prioritization in business needs, is start to build
yeah,
a foundational base of marketing customer data attributes, right? So with every customer, there should be a predefined, we call it a marketing customer analytical record, where
yeah,
should cover those data points, should cover 90% of the campaigns you're going to run. So actually, only 1 in 10 campaigns should be going through a data development lifecycle. The problem is it does take an upfront investment and upfront work to get that foundational base there, because from what I can see from a lot of consulting side and VMO2 side, a lot of those data attributes for marketing are built on that needs basis. So because of that, you don't have that foundational base to draw from. So that's something that I really want to take ownership of and start building out, because that record as
yeah,
well for AI in the future, it starts to become a very, very structured, very consistent, uniform view of customers, right? Not just you have everything,
yeah.
your whole customer profile in a data set there that can be used for
And
whatever.
who do you involve with this process to defining, I think, MCAR, if we want to do an acronym, the marketing
Mm.
customer automation
Analytical
record, or
record.
actually, no, automation record.
Analytical record.
Who do you,
Mm.
analytical record, sorry, I'll need to write that down. Who do you involve in a project like that? As we've seen with the Martech World Forum, it's that a lot of people underestimate the levels of different skills needed to get things right. I mean, what's your vision around that?
So I'm very much of the opinion that it should be business driven. So that MCAR we shouldn't start
Yeah.
from a base of what data do we have, and then build out a customer record from the data that we have. I'm very much from the view that there's
Okay.
a there's a right view from being from a telco business of what a marketing record should look like for us. For example, consistent across industries, you'll have your demographic data attributes, gender, location, first
Yeah.
name, last name. But for example, specific to telco, I would have within broadband, like the speeds, the number of products, the number of extension modules I have, meshes, all this. So
Yeah.
there are some things that are we should know up front from the business side. Forget the data side for now. So once we have that, it's then very much going back to the data team and to start developing this.
Yeah.
It's all in layers. So regardless of how people call it, bronze, silver, gold, tier 1, 2, 3, within the data warehouse, you'll find a lot of these data sits in the business ready layer, this presentation layer that we can draw from and build very quickly. But then there's a level behind that where it does exist within the data warehouse, but needs some processing, some
Yeah.
cleansing. So again, you start with the easy ones to start moving backwards. And then there's going to be some where, for example, in telco, there'll be a core like viewing data or browsing data, right? Those are our core data sets, and they're being captured not by a marketing stack or anything. They're captured by core systems for us, or mobile data usage. Those are core platforms. Just like in
Yeah.
banking, it'd be like credit card transaction platforms. Um, they may not be in the data warehouse at the moment. They may be just captured or rarely in a very raw format. In those kind of data points, then there's a lot of work that needs to be done to bring that into a marketing ready attribute. So
Yeah.
it's all layered really that even if it's not there in, for example, the data warehouse, we as a business capture browsing behavior. Banking as a business captures card transaction, deposit outflows, inflows. You can't even though
Yeah.
it doesn't include the data where these are core functions of what we do as a telco or banking industry. Because of that, the data is there. It may not be accessible, but there's work that can be done to bring that in, and that may cost money, effort, etc., time. But that's why I feel like you're
Yeah.
able to start from the business end and then work backwards. The data availability is a separate question, a separate challenge after you know what your customer record looks like.
And the reason from working backwards, that doesn't mean that you stop working on with the data that you already have. You start with the enrichment from backwards forwards. I think is that where you're getting at?
It's more. It's different for I've seen this. It's different for different businesses here. It's very the data landscape and what is available to each. I guess what I'm saying from my specific vantage point now at VMO2 is that there's some data more readily available than others. And
Yeah.
because of that, we should start building that into a record today. Rather than this needs-based attribute by attribute, where it's just a float of different attributes for individual campaigns. By building that record, then we just draw from that and start filling it in. So then, you're 20% complete, then you move to 40% complete. And what's, every percentage extra, maybe to get from like, for example, 80 to 90% complete, it's going to cost time and money. But for us now to get from like 0 to 50% of the record should be easy.
And how do you sell that internally, though? I mean, I can imagine that, especially in the beginning, it's a tough sell because the return on the data that people, that you have or that people will be delivering or helping you make more complete is going to be difficult to prove. But how do you sell that internally? Is that something you need to do with buy-in or support from higher up?
So from different places, there's some where leadership have asked the question where they've already had a CDP or they've been issuing campaigns out like advanced campaigns for years.
Yeah.
And after a certain amount of time, leadership also goes, why, if I think of this campaign, I have to wait 2 weeks, a month, 2 months to go live, right? The whole point we thought, of buying a CDP, buying an advanced CEP is to be able to drag and drop and to go live straight away. But what they're realizing then is that reliance on the data availability, the data attribute. So they themselves, sometimes leadership recognizes the fact that we can't just be building as we go along. We need that upfront investment of building that base. So sometimes you get top down steer to go that way. The reverse is the bottoms up is then going for the easy wins. So like I said, a lot of the data that is there today in different tables in the presentation layer, in like our gold silo, in data warehouse. We just need to collaborate that into that multi-customer record. That doesn't require a lot of work. Once we show that and we can show 50% of the picture, people go, oh, wow, we actually have quite good understanding of these core 50% attributes of a record, right? Then they say, so what do we need to get to the other 50%? So that's very much my strategy, going from a bottoms up. If you don't have leadership buy-in on this, it's more showing how strong building that record can be versus and then asking for the rest rather than going for all of it at once.
Yeah. No, definitely true. And I think it's definitely one of more of the convincing arguments that you can have is being able to prove that value. But also, and it also takes a certain level of self-confidence to also admit saying, hey, but it is only 50%. And we need your support to moving faster to completing this data. Tech, thank you very much. I see that we're at time, but thank you very much for your time today and your insights. I mean, it's great to hear about your experience in Southeast Asia, what you brought back, and now that you're working France side, I hope you get to invest all of your knowledge and your time and your energy into doing something amazing. And hopefully, we'll see you on stage in next year or the year after, showing the projects that you've worked on over at Virgin Media too.
No, Matt, thank you for having me. And it was great. Yeah, great meeting you then. I'm sure we'll speak again soon.